Hi, I'm Joe Satriani, and I'm going to talk to you about Jimi Hendrix as soon as I turn off this noise right here. No, I love Jimi Hendrix. Uh, I was just transfixed the first moment I heard him. Young kid and heard something coming out of the family stereo system, the big Magnavox, you know. And, I remember turning around, looking into that room, and it was as if I was looking through a time tunnel, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I was asking my brothers and sisters, "What is that? What is that? What music is that? Who is that?" And finding out it was Jimi Hendrix, I was then, my path was set. I was going to find out who this guy was. I was going to see if I could find records, and I was still. A sort of a recovering drummer. I'd been a drummer since age 9, and I was sort of still kind of playing, but it was getting, my lack of talent was getting kind of annoying. And so this came at a good time, a transition point. And so I became a Hendrix fan, aided by my older sister's boyfriends, who just thought it was so cool that this little kid was into Hendrix, so they would bring these albums over. And I wasn't yet, for some reason at that age, I wasn't going out and buying albums. It just didn't occur to me that I could do that. So I was still very much a kid, and wasn't thinking about it. So then, all of a sudden they'd say, "Oh, this is his record." And then all of a sudden there was the second record and then the third record. And so I hadn't really thought about playing guitar. So that didn't happen until 1970. So as a, 13 going on 14, when he passed away, that had such a huge impact on me. And I decided I was going to be a guitar player then. But I mean, the essence of it is that, his music to me is so beautiful and it's so powerful. And the way that he plays the instrument seems like he's completely free of what most of us sort of carry around with us, which is all of our lessons. When he plays, there seems to be no method. And it sounds like he's never learned anything in his life, and yet he's the most proficient guitar player. It's like this wonderful vibe that he gives off that he doesn't care, yet he's playing the most profound stuff. And that, I think, just as a fan, that is exciting, because it doesn't sound like he did, I can only think of maybe the song 1983 where he's really using scales, But everything else is just so, free. And especially when you're young and maybe you don't know too much about an artist's roots or stuff like that. You just think they've been delivered from outer space to your doorstep, and it's the total package. But I think time has shown that his genius was spread out with not only his playing, but the way that he composed, the way that he heard things, how he would record the songs, what he tried to do. And when you think about it, from 66 to 70, it's just a very volatile time, not only in the world, but in the world of recording, as things were going from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 track, and what people thought they could do in a recording studio. And then what artists were allowed to do, the freedom they started to get from the label. So you can take each album and you can pick out what's very special about it, I think, from a guitar player's point of view. Electric Ladyland certainly has so much in it that's so amazing, and there's all these different versions of Jimi. There's the live jamming with friends, and then there's the 1983, the concept sound poem, whatever you want to call it, and then there's just the hard blues and the usual psychedelic pop, stuff. But it's all brilliant. That's what's so amazing about it. I mean, Buddha Cha's Slight Return, I mean, that's just so perfect. You know what I mean? Every time you hear it, it just sounds like the whole thing's on fire, It's amazing. That's the biggest challenge, I think, of playing Hendrix songs, is that if you're devoted to Hendrix, then you're haunted by every single note that he played, and every single note that you play doesn't match up with the one that he plays, and so you're like, well, that's not right. And it's hard to break free, and I found the only way for me to do it is to concentrate on the live recordings, because that's what he did. he obviously figured, well, I can't do that. I can't represent the record live, certainly not back then when there were barely monitors anywhere, and they would just plug it into a couple of Marshalls. And no delays. I mean, he used so much tape delay on the albums, and yet he always played flat, live. So I thought that was so interesting. But he would, I don't know, I guess the feeling is that this is just today, this is this gig, let's just make it fresh today. Capturing the spirit of what he did, and I guess the spirit that he invokes in you when you're a fan and you're listening to the records, is the most powerful tool that you take with you if you want to sort of recreate that in your own gig. But there's the homework part. I think that a lot of people, they have to understand this whole, how that all works. How does somebody put that together? And so I guess when I started with it, I kept thinking, well, okay, how do those notes work, let's say, with an E chord, So then if you pick them apart, you go, well, okay, well, there's my root, my 5, and the 6 works. And then if my destination is here, then that means that there's this pickup note, and then there's the one that stays the same. And so you start seeing the shape, and you go, okay, I get it. One note's moving, one note's the same. They're all part of the key, and they resolve to the chord that he's at the moment. And when you start out and you're just learning bar chords, that sounds like guitar playing from Mars, But then once you break it down and you're looking at the A chord and you go, oh, I get it. That resolves there, and I can do it, I can do all these different little 2-note double stop, turnarounds. And then maybe I can figure out where if I'm here and then I'm going to E, and then it just switches the relationship between, this is the 3rd, but then it turns into a 5th of the next chord. And it started to make sense to me. Being able to play piano just a little bit, I was able to visualize it as well and say, okay, I get it. This is almost like country piano kind of stuff, And then as I started to read more about Jimmy and, the kind of music that he played growing up, I thought, okay, this makes total sense with his background or the gigs that he played, that he'd have to start with Chuck Berry, and it's a lot of piano being moved over to guitar kind of stuff. So that kind of made sense. I remember the first time I heard it, I love that little thing, Sounds like a horn line or a keyboard line. It doesn't sound like something a guitar player would do, but with the delay and the volume coming in and out, and then all of a sudden you hear this lick, Those are like little, for me, they were revelations, as you sit there and play with the record and you pick these different things out. And some of them were normal because, that kind of stuff, you go, well, yes, that's just blues. People have been doing that for a lot. And you could see where there was Buddy Guy, and Hendrix, was so inspired by Buddy Guy and how that grew out of that. But then somehow, like all great players, they borrow things and they put things together in different ways. And it comes out in a very original sort of package, and that was Hendrix's genius there with how he would say, live, he'd say, we're just going to do some Buddy Guy stuff for you and stuff like that. And he would sort of revel in his roots but bring new stuff with it, because while he was doing this and doing that Buddy Guy kind of stuff like that, he'd also somehow managed to, I don't know if I can get this all in here at once. It's going to be a lot of noise. Somehow that would work into it, He'd have all that stuff there, and he'd have the Buddy Guy stuff, and then he'd have the feedback, and it was like, wow. To me, that was my basis. So when I go on stage, I think, well, that's the starting point. The starting point is I want to, and I feel like I have to bring that all in to capture that spirit that you were talking about. So I'm not trying to say, well, this is what he did in Voodoo Child and House Burning Down, and this is what he did in Hear My Train a Comin' or something like that. But the spirit of that, he would do that one night at a gig, that he would put feedback and a legato line and some Buddy Guy all together in a blues. That's like, wow, that's heavy. That's the real musical message there, I think. that stuff, when I first heard that, I thought that is so beautiful, you know. How is that on the same album as, you know, Love or Confusion or Third Stone from the Sun? I mean, it's like, wow. He goes from crazy feedback and just soundscapes to this song that's just so beautiful with just, you know, just beautiful E chord, something you would expect John Lennon to play, you know, except it's Hendrix playing it, you know. It's amazing. And it's just, but as you said, his articulation was like this other voice, you know, and it showed that he had this depth, that he wanted to create and he wanted to destroy and he wanted to convey love and anger and everything in between, you know. And he was successful at it, which was pretty amazing. He obviously spent the time, you know, with the pedals of the day to push the sound of guitar into a new area. I remember that was I Hear My Train A-Comin', maybe from Hendrix in the West or something. There was just one line that he did where he was like, maybe he did it would last just about that long. And I remember thinking, what is that? That is like unbelievable, you know, it's just completely linear. And then the scale, the Dorian scale. And it's the kind of thing like, I can't imagine what was going through his head, but it sounds like he just played it. It was just a pure musical moment that he played. I'm certain he didn't go, I could throw in a Dorian mode right here and it was going to be really cool. So, but when you're listening to it, it stands out all of a sudden because there's a lot of blues on that track. And, you know, he's playing with his teeth and using the wah-wah pedal and doing all sorts of stuff and trying to get the Marshalls to be perfect that one particular night. But then all of a sudden, he gets enough sustain to do this particular line. And I remember just thinking how beautiful that sounded. And so that started me off with, you know, doing this for like minutes at a time. I would do it on every string, and then I'd try with different fingers. And then I started going. Then I started with a. And then I just kept moving it. Then I thought, well, if I. And I started thinking about those open strings a lot, and you start to put them all, you build upon it, you know. But the first one was that, I think, was that I Hear My Train A-Comin', hearing him do that in a live setting. Because in the studio, you know, there'd be the overdubs, and you'd hear flutters, you know, being panned left and right, and there'd be other stuff. But to hear just a trio, and then that was something that he played, and when I heard it, I thought, well, that means it's acceptable. In other words, he set a new standard. Like when you're soloing, it doesn't all have to be in the box. If he's doing a blues, he doesn't have to keep it strictly blues. And that went with, like I played before, with doing the feedback, working feedback in with Buddy Guy, and then all of a sudden, I mean, I don't know, what was his, I wish I knew what roots informed him to think that that was a cool thing to do. If I'm going, you know, and you go, what if I change the tone? Maybe it'll sound a little bit more interesting, you know? Variations of from that little flutter to then spreading it out to, you know, diatonic, and then to going to figuring out, you go, well, can I do it where I'm just still sticking with minor pentatonic? And so I would do it really clean for a while to make sure I had the right technique. I was landing on the strings right, and then I would fire up the, you know, the distortion. You've got the sound going up, right? And then you've also got a picture going across. You know, if your brain can handle that. So yeah, it is I think I actually recall that I think my brain was a little bit ahead of my fingers at the time. So I could look down and I could see, this will work, Joe. You just have to get your hand to cooperate. And but I think behind it was the fact that I had all these hours of listening to Hendrix, and he was like, he was the ultimate coach that said, no, you go out there and try anything. Because, that was his thing. You could hear him he would just crash and burn left and right, all in the purpose of trying to reach some new, great, wonderful musical height, And it's a dangerous, method of playing, and it might get you fired now and then from a gig that you'll just try anything. But it's the one that, if you spend years being a musician, it's the satisfaction you get from it. The artistic satisfaction is the only thing that's going to get you through the bad times. That's just my personal opinion. I'd rather, have those memories of those nights that worked and it was special and it was magical and people appreciated it than to think that, you've had this one solid gig forever and you've never played anything memorable or have tried, to just do something silly one night, And anybody who plays with feedback, they're asking for trouble, because it's, what is it, a 50%? It's 50-50. It's going to work, or it's just going to be noise, or nothing's going to happen and you really look silly, But sometimes you get extremely lucky, and then it pays off. But that's where I think you have to remember you got to keep it musical. You have to try to keep it musical. Towards the end of the tour, this thing was filmed, and for some reason, towards the end of the tour, Chad started to destroy his drums a lot more, and Sam would then start to join in. It would leave me and Mike, to just sort of fend for ourselves, And I started just going crazy. I started stepping on the Proctavia, and I was already running the Marshalls pretty heavy anyway, and it would just be a wall of scream, And I would just sit there while all this destruction was going on. I'd be sitting there wailing, just running my fingers up the strings and just pulling on anything and just listening to the scream, the howl. And I loved it. And to me, it was just a pure Hendrix moment. I was just doing it for myself because it was just so liberating. It was just warmed my soul to sort of channel the Hendrix moment, like that. And then it eventually turned into playing the Star Spangled Banner. And the last gig that we did in Las Vegas, it was going on again, and it really was going on. And I was doing the feedback and stuff, and I started playing Star Spangled Banner, and the audience, for some reason, sang the anthem. And it was the first time, I can't remember a gig where I've played that and people have sung. Even at baseball games and football games, people don't sing it. They just stand there, But this time, the whole audience sang, and we did the whole song. It was like, wow, that was heavy. In many ways, like a true artist, he pushed society to recognize where they were going. I think that's, the true artist, they come out with a painting, a book, a film, piece of music, and people go, oh my God, that's too shocking. How dare you? But the artist is saying, no, this is where we're going. I'm just reflecting where we're going. And you guys haven't noticed it yet. And that, Jimmy's version of the Star Spangled Banner was a peep, into the future. That's what it was. He was looking ahead saying, this is the version that represents what we've become and what we're becoming. But people were still, no, it's you know what I mean? But his experience in life was like, no, that's not where we are. That's not where we're going. So, and now it's accepted now. Although my experience playing at different sporting events tells me that not all sports fans feel the same way. Football fans, basketball fans, they want you to go as far as you can go, and the baseball fans are still on the conservative side. I think that syncopation for me was hearing him do blues, actually, that I picked up more of that. He's doing, when he does those things, in something like that, he's obviously doing hammer-ons and pull-offs. We don't really call that legato, but it is in a way. It's just the smallest type, right? But then I noticed, you know, if he's playing a slow blues like this, and he's going, I mean, where's the timing in that? If you're sitting there, you know, trying to write it down, you go, you know, and then you realize, well, he's free. He's just like talking. He's like talking to a lover or complaining to, or you know, complaining to the world, or his heart is breaking and he's just yelling out to the world or something, you know. And to me, that made more sense than, you know, dun, 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 that kind of, you know, sort of peppy Chicago blues. At the time, being the kid from Long Island that also listened to Black Sabbath, I was like, I'm not, that's not touching me. But when I heard Hendrix do Red House or all the versions of blues that he would make up and do live, I thought, no, that to me is heavy, because it sounds like he's really saying something. And what appealed to me was the fact that he was sort of playing over the bar line, to put it lightly. You know, he just forget about the bar line. He would just play while the other guys were playing. But his timing and his sense of phrasing was so strong that it was never for nothing. It was like he was always conveying something with that chaotic flurry of just trying to bend anything he could within that little box, and to bend as far as he could, to me was truly beautiful, you know, like from what he said from Dick Cavett. So if he was here in C, and he'd be trying to go way up there on the B string and get up to the minor third, or if he was bending from minor third to 4, he'd go up to the 5. But when he came down, he would hit a 4, and then he'd bend up to the major 6 and flutter the 9, and you know what I mean? And it was like a wonderland. I could take 2 bars and I could sit there and develop a style just off of that, you know? So that got me practicing this box, but learning how to, and trying to figure out how he would connect a lot of those things and how I could do the same. The other thing that he did is when he would put these little notes together, and this goes back to his sort of blues roots, is he'd do those little things. He'd do those. He'd always be any of that. You'd hear him do that together with obviously that kind of stuff. But when he did it in a raw, you know, in the height of a blues solo where his volume was already up and he could get some feedback and the sustain, that was really attractive to me. I thought, I want to learn how to do that. So I would take a look at that box and I'd figure, well, if he can go, then I'm going to learn how to go. And I'm just going to see what I can get to work. I'll practice it first, and then as I'm improvising, I'll see if I can get it to, you know, to speak like the way that he does it. So I guess I saw him, you know, on the few videos, films that were available at the time of him playing. You know, he had those massive hands, but he didn't really stretch like that. But as I was growing up learning how to play, there were guys like Alan Holdsworth who said, no, I'm just going to, you know, stretch as far as I can. And I sort of started to put the Holdsworth together with the Hendrix and the Buddy Guy, I guess the 3 of them together somehow, you know, because I was thinking, I do love the idea of bending that G string to get that sort of expressive sound. And then I like the idea of being able to stretch. And so these riffs that a lot of those players were doing in the late 60s, but Hendrix was sort of fluttering them more than other players, putting it together into something, you know. I would use that, let's say if I was, we were talking about that solo in Andalusia from the last record, and that's got like me doing the kitchen sink, I'm doing the whammy bar stuff, I'm digging in playing blues, I'm playing all the legato, I'm doing hammer-ons, pull-offs, and flutters, and whatever you want to call it. And it's sort of, it reminds me of the little building blocks that I did listening to Hendrix and practicing the legato, the flutters, not only with the minor pentatonic, but then with the influence of other players, saying, I can throw in a flat 5, maybe I can stretch to a 5 and a minor 6th, and, you know, take this blues lick and make it sound more, what would become more heavy metal sounding, you know, just by making it more natural minor and less blues Dorian sounding. I spent many years like trying not to copy him, and because he was such a big influence. And but when I play, you know, it was like when I'm playing with Chad, Sammy, and Mike. You know, when we first started getting together and we started to learn about each other and stuff, I remember Chad saying how it sounded so much like Hendrix when I played, you know. And I thought, well, I could tell you why, you know, but I said, I've been trying to avoid that, but I can't help it. It just comes out, you know. Even when I'm playing stuff that's not Hendrix-like, my sensibilities are based on what I think the greatest guitar player in the world achieved and how he went about it. So I guess it's obvious it's going to come out that way.